Here's a scenario. You're working on a shower remodel and you need to be able to extend the water lines just a little bit. So you turn off all the water to your house and then you go and you cut the water line. But because you decided that you didn't want to take the time to look for the right tool for the job, you used a utility knife to cut said water line. And in the process of doing so, you slice your arm open. What is your first move? This scenario is not just hypothetical, it's what happened to me about a week ago. And I wanted to talk about this today because I thought it was a really cool case study for preparedness. You see, preparedness is not just about having the right gear, having the right tools, and having the right resources. That's all really good, important stuff. You don't have the right stuff, oftentimes it's hard when situations arise. That said, probably the bigger half of preparedness is knowing how to use whatever resources you have at your disposal to be able to handle whatever situations you're in. And that comes from learning and from experience. So that's the scenario. I sliced my arm open. So you can see this happened actually 8 days ago and it's already healing up really, really well. It's really closed. Not really that big of an issue. But I actually got lucky in this situation. You see, I'm only about maybe half an inch away from the radial artery. And if I had hit that, I could have been bleeding all over the place. So here is what I did in this situation, and I think that this is in some ways maybe a good model of what we should do. So first, I assessed the situation. Immediately, I felt the pain. I realized I'd whacked my arm with a knife. It was a brand new blade in my utility knife, so it cut very quickly. And so I quickly looked at the situation and realized, 1, it's a cut very cleanly through. 2, it's cut all the way through the skin layer. And knowing that I've cut all the way through, now I know that I need to completely close the wound. Just putting a Band-Aid on it, it's not gonna heal very well. So I needed to close the wound. That means, in most cases, go to the hospital and get stitches. But I also noticed a couple of other things in my immediate assessment. 1, all of my digits were working, which means I hadn't done any real damage to the ligaments and tendons or even the muscles. Even if I did a little bit of damage, it was nothing significant. All of the feeling was there in my hand, so I hadn't done any major nerve damage. So it wasn't as serious a situation as maybe it could have been. I also noticed that there wasn't a ton of blood, which meant that I hadn't hit that artery. So once again, I wasn't in any real significant danger, at least not in the short term. What that means is I just needed to make sure it was good and clean, and 2, I needed to close the wound and keep bad crap from getting inside of it. Given that the water was shut off at my house and that I couldn't turn it back on until I finished repairing the pipe, I decided that I really didn't want to have to go to the hospital and spend a couple of hours and who knows how much money just to get a few stitches in my arm. So after making that assessment, I went over to our first aid stuff to see exactly what I had available. So first, I knew that I had some of these on hand. These are Steri strips. They're made by 3M. There may be other brands, but 3M makes really good adhesive stuff. Steri strips, they're first of all sterile. These are exactly what the surgeon used for my wife on her knee on the outside after the stitches. And essentially what they do is they're like a big butterfly Band-Aid, sort of. They're just kind of a piece of tape that you can stick onto one side and really stretch across and pull onto the other side. And it's got a strong enough adhesive that it can hold wounds closed pretty well. It's not as good as one of these, but those are pretty expensive, like 20 bucks for a single one. And I don't have a bunch of those on hand. Although after this, I'm thinking 20 bucks is a lot cheaper than an emergency room visit and way faster and more convenient. So I might get a few. Anyway, back to what I did. So I knew I had some of these, but they weren't gonna stick very well on my arm because my arm is covered in hair. So one of the very first things I did was I literally grabbed my razor, I got some water on my arm, and I just shaved a few little stripes, and so that my arm was very, very clean right there. Just no hair, nothing, just skin. Next thing that I did was I wanted to make sure that it was very clean. I grabbed the rubbing alcohol that I have right there on hand, pulled it out, got a cotton ball. In fact, my wife helped me because one of my hands was tied up, right? So it's a little bit harder to do all this work with one hand, and because we were moving kind of quickly. So my wife, she heard me make a little bit of commotion. No, I did not cry, but it's okay if you do when you get cut. I'm just not really like a physical pain crier, we'll just say that. So she got me a cotton ball, she got it all wet with alcohol, and I took it and I started dabbing. Now, the other thing that I did was I used my fingers like this, and I kind of opened and closed, just a little bit, and kind of squeeze this way. What that did is it sort of opened up those cut blood vessels and it allowed a little bit of blood to flow. This is something I learned a long time ago. I don't know if it's best medical practice. The idea is that if there was anything that got in when the cut happened, right? If there was any bacteria or any debris that got in, letting some of that blood that's right there on the surface kind of flow out would help sort of flush things outward. So I let that happen and then, of course, continued to dab with alcohol. And I let that alcohol kind of be over the surface for like a full minute because that's what they do whenever they are gonna stick a needle in my arm, right? They go like for a whole minute with an alcohol swab and enough that I could sort of like squeeze it out of the cotton ball and let it sort of drip down into the wound. It was gonna be enough to get it clean. If I had iodine would maybe do an even better job. Another thing that I have that I used later on is this stuff. This is called Hibiclens. This stuff is used for just on the skin. The reason I even have some is because previously after a surgery, that's what I was told I should use to clean the wound on the surface because it helps keep away any microbes and stuff that could lead to infection and it just helps it heal better. So I did use that later on once the wound had started to close itself up. So then what? Then I needed it to be very dry so that the adhesive would stick. Again, since I wasn't using stitches, I was adhering to the surface, I needed it dry. I just used paper towel. I figured that would be probably the most sterile. If I just used like the hand towel that was there, I'd get blood on the hand towel, but I would also get whatever's on the hand towel into my arm. So I used a clean paper towel and just dabbed at it until it was good and dry. I even kind of wiped this direction, which was sort of, the cut was angled inward like this. So kind of going that direction, didn't pull the cut open over and over and over again. Then I took steri strips. It took only like 2 on this one to cover most of it. And really I just cut them to length. So on this little card here, there's 3 individual strips. I took off 2 of them, cut them a little bit short, stuck them on my arm. And so then what I did is I stick it on here, and once it's adhered really well, then I kind of pulled it this direction so that it would really close the wound really well, good and tight. And then I stick it to the other side and kind of rub it down like this, and then it's just stuck, okay? So that closed the wound, but that wasn't gonna keep other stuff from getting into it, and it wasn't gonna help with some of the other issues. So then we just got a regular old gauze pad. You can pick them up at any store that has a pharmacy area, and laid the gauze pad over the top. And then I took a wrap or an ace bandage and wrapped it around the arm with a little bit of pressure. Not so much that my hand was starting to go numb, but enough pressure that I was putting some compression over the wound. That's gonna help with the bleeding, help it to stop a lot faster. But the other thing it's gonna do is help keep swelling down. Whenever we have any sort of, especially when there's like contact made, it was, I kind of whacked my arm when this happened, but also even with lacerations, oftentimes swelling will come to the area. Swelling is intended to help you to be able to immediately use that part of your body so you can get out of a dangerous situation. But it also causes more long-term damage. So anytime there's any sort of swelling happening, minimizing that swelling is good. We minimize swelling by compression, by ice or cold, and also by elevating, keeping it above the heart so that you don't have as much blood and fluids draining to it. I just stuck with compression. That's what I did. That way I could immediately get back to work and I could put that pipe back together and get the water to my house turned back on. Remember, I said that I shut off the water to my house and I couldn't use the water until I was done, until I put it back together. If I turned the water onto the house, it'd be shooting all over my bathroom. But fortunately, because we were turning off the water, my wife had warned our children and they had filled up several cups full of water. So my wife went downstairs, got 2 big cups of water from my kids that they had set aside, and that's what I was able to use to sort of rinse out the wound. So I was able to do it with fairly minimal water instead of just running a bunch of water over it from the sink. That was my immediate, we'll call first aid. First aid is typically intended to be what you're able to do sort of in the field in your scenario until you're able to get appropriate medical help. Now again, in this situation, I didn't feel like I needed medical help, but because the cut had gone all the way through all layers of skin, my wife was concerned. So she convinced me to let her call one of our friends who's a doctor, who basically said, yeah, sounds like you guys did everything right. Probably get by without stitches, but another thing that would help, this was his recommendation, is you can use Superglue. Now I've read articles where people say, Don't use regular super glue. The stuff they use in the hospital is different, and it is different. But here's what my doctor friend told me I should do if I was just gonna use regular super glue, which we already had on hand. He said, make sure the wound is all the way closed. Hold it really good and closed. You do not want the glue to get down into the wound between the two sides, because that would prevent those two sides from being able to make contact and heal back together. So you're trying to adhere to the good, clean skin on either side of the laceration. So the glue just kind of goes over the top. Then he said he recommended still putting on the steri strips over the top of the glue after the glue had dried, just kind of for good measure to help hold it closed well and prevent pulling, right? If I hit it on something, I mean, I was still going to train in jiu-jitsu with this thing. So we wanted to be able to keep it good and closed. Of course, I actually stuck with keeping the wrap on it because once again, putting that compression on it helped to keep it closed and help keep any strain off of it. A couple days later, I finally made it out to the pharmacy and I actually bought some liquid bandage. This is a generic version of New Skin, but basically it's kind of like super glue, but it's antiseptic and it's just intended for that use. This does say it's specifically for small cuts and wounds, but basically I was just using to help sort of keep it closed as well as keep stuff out of it. But I was also putting just a large Band-Aid over the top of the whole thing, mostly just to keep crud out of there before I put on the ace wrap. Now, a couple other things that I have, this is Bleed Stop. It's intended to be able to be used on small wounds up to large major wounds. And the idea is you basically pour the powder into the wound. It's like the stuff the military uses, although they have a lot of different applications, but it's intended to help that blood to clot really quickly and stop the bleeding so that you don't bleed out. I keep this stuff around. I have it in my car, I have it in my first aid kit at home. I absolutely recommend keeping that around for those scenarios. Now here I am, it's just been a week. If I had gone to the hospital, I'd still have stitches in for 2 or 3 more days, but no stitches. The wound is closed up really, really, really well, and it's healing over really well. And at this point, all I'm doing, I'm cleaning it. I wash it when I wash my hands and stuff. And then most of the day, I keep just some of this liquid bandage on it. And that's been enough to keep bacteria and stuff from getting in and to kind of give it a little bit of help staying closed. I just wanted to share that experience with you today. I think it's important that we think about the kinds of situations we could be in and make sure that we have the knowledge and skills to be able to handle that sort of situation, and to make sure that for the most part we have the resources that we need. If I'd been in the mountains when this happened, could I have handled this in basically the same way? Yeah, because in my regular gear that's in my car or in my pack, I have pretty much all of these things. I don't know if I had steri strips in my pack first aid kit, but now I will, because these could be used in a pinch in place of stitches. So think about how you can apply that to the kinds of situations you might be in, whether it's first aid, whether it's a job loss where you're gonna need food to live on for a little while, or it's another emergency situation. What gear do you need to have on hand, but also what knowledge and skills do you think you may be lacking that you could work on developing? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, because hopefully I can help you develop those skills, either from things that I know or from other experts that I can bring here on the channel to help teach those things to you. So until we meet again, stay safe and stay prepared.